Welcome back to another episode of My Brother Said So. As with me always is my little brother, Ben the Sasquatch. And we're here to play Fortnite and talk conspiracies and conspiracy culture. Today, we are going to go over a pretty serious one, and this is the siege at Waco, Texas. So, in order to back up what we're going to talk about, we're going to give a little factual history. Then we're going to slam you with some of these conspiracy theories that permeate the culture to this day. Now, Ben, do you remember back to our discussion on Ruby Ridge? We talked about the tension that seemed to be floating in the air after that event.
Yes, I remember that.
All right. So I want you to think about when you were young. Do you remember the environment? How old were you when 9/11 happened?
I would have been in first grade. I
Okay, do you
remember it
remember?
happened. I remember the day coming home
Okay.
from school. I remember getting told to we left the school early. Um, it was a big deal. I
All
remember
right.
it very vividly.
So you remember like kind of like a feeling in the atmosphere or
Yeah,
anything
everybody
like
was kind
that?
of freaking the fuck out.
All
No,
right.
no, it was like nobody knew what was going down. Like it was like everybody
Yeah.
everywhere was just kind of like, oh, what do we do?
So one of the things that kind of felt similar was in the time period between Ruby Ridge, Waco, Texas, and eventually the Oklahoma City bombing. The air was permeated with a sense of tension for a lot of these kind of groups. It wasn't the same feeling, I would say. The whole country felt 9/11. But for people who were paying attention, were aware, and were involved in these kind of subcultured groups, they had their ear to the ground and they felt the reverberations of the Ruby Ridge incident. And little groups like the group we're going to talk about today began to arm themselves. So, the Waco siege, also known as the Waco massacre, depending on who you talk to, was a siege by federal government and Texas law enforcement. It involved several agencies, officials, and it basically raided a compound belonging to this religious group. I would call them a new religious movement. Many would call them a cult known as the Branch Davidians between February 28th and April 19th of 1993. Let's say that again in case you weren't paying attention. Between February 28th and April 19th. Think back to the end of February. Now think back to a couple days ago and that amount of time being held up in your own home, locked away because you believe something a little bit different than your neighbors. The Branch Davidians were led by a man who called himself David Koresh, though that wasn't his original legal name. And they were headquartered in a place called Mount Carmel Center. It was a ranch in an unincorporated McClellan County, Texas. 13 miles and 21 kilometers northwest of Waco, Texas, which is why it's often called the Waco Massacre. Now, the ATF started to suspect the group of stockpiling illegal weapons, and they obtained a search warrant for the compound and arrest warrants for Koresh and several of the group's members. So, let's talk about it. Once they basically planned this sudden daylight raid of the ranch in order to serve these warrants, any advantage of surprise was lost, and a local reporter came in and tipped off about the raid, asked for directions to a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier who was actually coincidentally David Koresh's brother-in-law. Thus, the group's members were fully armed and prepared for the ATF initiating raid. Small towns, man, everybody knows everybody's business. You see a gang of ATF rolling into town asking for directions, you might just go notify your neighbor. So a gunfight erupted, resulting in the deaths of ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. Following the ATF entering the property and its failure to execute the search warrant, a siege was initiated by Federal Bureau of Investigation, during which negotiations between the parties attempted to reach a compromise. After 51 days, on April 19th, 1993, the FBI launched a CS gas, that's tear gas, Ben, tear gas attack, in an attempt to force the Branch Davidians out of their compound buildings. Shortly thereafter, the Mount Carmel Center became engulfed in flames. The fire and the reaction to the final attack within the group resulted in the deaths of 76 Branch Davidians, including 28 children and David Koresh himself. The events of the siege and the attack, particularly the origin of the fire, are disputed in various sources to this very day. The Department of Justice will report one thing, and then the ATF will report another. The FBI will report one thing, and the Branch Davidians will report another. It is a muddled mess, and sifting through it is not exactly as easy as asking who started these fires. Who decided to light a fire and set off the gas, which engulfed these buildings in flames and resulted in the deaths of so many lives. The Ruby Ridge standoff and the Waco siege were cited by Timothy McVeigh as the main reasons for him and Terry Nichols to plan and execute the Oklahoma City bombing. 2 years later, on April 19th, 1995, as well as other modern day militia movement attacks and plannings. So, some of the conspiracy theories that surround this event include things like the ATF went in and intentionally started this raid and this siege because they did not like the fact that David Koresh had underage children in the home who he had actually fathered other children with. So he was a polygamist. He had taken over this small religious movement, new religious movement, cult, if you will, and had impregnated several of the members. He had kind of complete control over these people, and he had a lot of weapons. And the government at the time just didn't.
Sounds like a real
that.
problem.
Yeah, to them, yeah, they just didn't like that. So the freedom that these people were supposed to have in our country seems to have been quickly taken away from them because of another man's beliefs. They quickly seem to encroach upon these people with their investigation based on the weird cult in the compound. And to me, it is a sad kind of story. And I even like the negotiator, who is in this case was the partner of the negotiator from the Ruby Ridge case. Because there's only so many of these guys. And later, he kind of spoke out against this case to some degree, saying, like, it shouldn't have went down the way it went down. Now, then, some of the weird things they did throughout the siege, remember, this is 51 days, was they blared music constantly at top levels, like super, super high decibels, hundreds and hundreds of decibels, to the point where they were going nuts. And they would play the worst music of the time, like Cher, like serious. I'm sure Cher was one of the songs they were playing, think about, like, do you believe? Don't want to sing it all because they'll get me in trouble.
No,
you know what I mean? Over and over and over again for 51 days. They did all sorts of
This
weird
sounds
stuff.
like a really bad Kevin Smith movie. Like, what is this?
Wow, very close. Yes, Red State, the movie Kevin made, is based on this exact event, Ben. So
Oh,
very
really?
good.
Oh,
Very good.
I
Yes,
was being
yeah.
sarcastic. I wasn't
No,
being
very good.
serious.
Yes, Kevin directed a film called Red State. That yeah. Oh man, we got to get my friend Chris Graves on this show. Hopefully, he'll come on and talk about some of that kind of stuff because he's a very knowledgeable guy in this area. He would be excellent. However, I shouldn't drop his name unless he wants to participate. But um, uh, this event, this Waco, Texas event, would change the face of the way churches operated because up until now, a lot of new religious movements would have weaponry on the premises, and Christians got scared, and it went from weaponry on the premises of a new religious movement or a small church to keep it at home. You know what I mean? Which I don't necessarily agree with the idea of a weapon in your church anyway, but that's your religious belief. That's your religious idea. And as a libertarian, I don't think it's I believe in the Second Amendment. So I have always looked at this as something fishy happened here. I do believe that the fires were initiated. That's my belief. That's not anybody, that's not the official story. But yet again, you're talking to a conspiracy nutbag. So my tinfoil hat views are not the views of, the government. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how do you rate the conspiracy theory that the ATF and government may have intentionally set these fires? Or do you believe that this was just an accident of coincidence after a 51-day siege on a group that is easy to hate?
Based on the way that you make it sound, I would say that it is most definitely this is probably like the number one topic for me because it has a little bit of everything. And I'm not saying that to sound horrible, but it really you have
underage
agents,
sex.
Underage sex calls. No, I'm not. Yeah, that. You literally have everything that anybody is into nowadays in this one little story.
Whoa, hey, Epstein Island over here. Easy. Everything gets kicked off YouTube. All right.
You know what I mean by that.
So 0 to 10. Validity
0 to 10. All right.
The
probably an 8.
Theories. An 8. Okay. Again, and don't get me wrong, David Koresh was kind of a scumbag. He was a manipulator. He was everything that most cult leaders have in them. You know what I mean? He had those. And if you study his story, you're going to be like, yeah, he seems a lot like, of Manson or some of these guys at the time. But at the end of the day, did they have a right to be doing what they were doing? Maybe. To a degree. He was breaking certain laws, but not so sure they should have been raided and sieged for 51 straight days.
Right.
And who shot first? It's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, man, we'll never actually know the answer to that because it's the big bad government versus a persecuted religious movement. Or a cult, however you view it.
Or a cult.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for a pretty serious one. Holy schmackers. We never usually go that deep. But we're going to see you next time on My Brother Said So.
Yeah. Have a good one. And remember to always stay in the now.